The warning came through every communication channel at once. Emergency broadcasts flooded human space with the same desperate message, repeated in broken standard galactic. Please, we have nowhere else to go. We are dying. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Harmony, watching the massive alien fleet drift toward Earth's outer defenses. The ships were unlike anything in her database. Crystalline structures that caught starlight and bent it into impossible colors. They moved slowly, almost gracefully, but she could see the damage. Hull breaches sealed with what looked like hardened resin, entire sections missing. These weren't warships coming to conquer. These were refugees. Captain, her communications officer called out, "We're getting identification signals. They're calling themselves the Vorthak." Chen felt her blood run cold. Every human in known space had heard of the Vorthak. They were the monsters parents used to scare children. The beings that could reach into your mind and steal your very thoughts. 3 months ago, the Galactic Council had announced their complete extermination. Apparently that announcement had been premature. "How many ships?" she asked. 237 vessels. Population scans show roughly 8,000 individuals. The officer paused. "Captain, they're requesting permission to enter our space. They say they've been rejected by every other civilization." Chen stared at the view screen. The lead Vorthak ship was enormous, easily the size of a city. But it wasn't moving aggressively. If anything, it seemed to be barely functioning. She could see smaller ships trailing behind it. Some barely held together. "Patch me through to Earth Command," she ordered. Within minutes, she was speaking directly to Admiral Rodriguez, the head of Earth's defense forces. The man's weathered face filled her screen, and she could see the same uncertainty she felt reflected in his eyes. "Captain Chen," Rodriguez said, "you're looking at the most dangerous species in known space. The Council's xenobiology reports say they feed on consciousness itself. They can steal memories, thoughts, even personality." "With respect, sir," Chen replied, "they're also clearly running from something. And if the Council wanted them dead?" Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I know what you're thinking. The enemy of my enemy. But these aren't just political refugees, Captain. These beings could potentially hollow out every human mind they encounter." Chen watched the alien ships drift closer. One of the smaller vessels suddenly went dark, its crystalline structure losing its inner light. She realized she was watching beings die in the cold of space. "Sir, what would we want someone to do if it were humans out there?" The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. "Stand by, Captain. This decision is going above my head." For the next 6 hours, Chen maintained position while politicians and generals debated on Earth. The Vorthak fleet waited patiently, their ships growing dimmer as more power systems failed. She received constant updates from her science officer about the deteriorating condition of the alien vessels. Finally, the communication came directly from Earth's president. "Captain Chen, this is President Williams. You are authorized to escort the Vorthak fleet to Luna Station for processing. We're granting them temporary asylum pending a full review." Chen almost couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Understood, Mr. President. What are our rules of engagement?" "Standard humanitarian protocols. If they show any signs of aggression, you have permission to defend yourself." "But Captain," the President's voice carried a weight that made her straighten, "the entire galaxy is going to be watching how we handle this. Make sure we do it right." Chen opened a channel to the Vorthak fleet. "This is Captain Chen of the United Earth ship Harmony. You have been granted permission to enter human space. Please follow our escort ships to a safe harbor." The response came in a voice unlike anything she had ever heard, like crystal bells singing in harmony. "We thank you. We did not expect kindness. We have traveled far, and many have already joined the silent darkness. Your species offers what none others would." As they began the journey toward Luna Station, Chen's science officer approached her with a worried expression. "Captain, I'm picking up some unusual readings from their ships. It's like their technology is partially biological. And there's something else." The officer hesitated. "I think some of their ships are actually alive." Chen studied the data. The crystalline structures weren't just ships. They were living beings, massive creatures that served as homes for the Vorthak. And they were dying. The journey across the galaxy had taken its toll not just on the refugees, but on their living vessels. Over the next day, as they traveled through human space, more of the galaxy learned about Earth's decision. The reaction was swift and furious. The Altarian Trade Federation immediately severed all commercial ties with humanity. The Centauri coalition recalled their ambassador. Even species that had been friendly with humans sent messages of disgust and betrayal. Chen received a personal message from her counterpart in the Tau Ceti Navy, a captain she had served alongside during the Outer Rim conflicts. "Sarah," the message read, "what are you people thinking? These creatures destroyed 17 civilizations before the Council stopped them. They don't just kill, they consume the very essence of who you are. There won't be anything left of humanity when they're done with you." But as Chen watched the Vorthak ships struggle toward safety, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. These beings had traveled across half the galaxy, watched their people die in the emptiness of space, and still maintained enough discipline to ask for permission, rather than simply taking what they needed. When they finally reached Luna Station, Chen was among the first to witness the Vorthak disembark. They were beautiful in an alien way, tall, slender beings that seemed to be made of living crystal. Their skin reflected light in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and their eyes held depths that suggested vast intelligence. But they were also clearly suffering. Many had to be carried from their ships. Their crystal-like skin had lost its luster, becoming dull and gray. These weren't the terrifying monsters of galactic legend. They were refugees, exhausted and grieving, grateful for any shelter they could find. The lead Vorthak, who identified herself as Resonance of Deep Waters, spoke with President Williams directly. Her words were translated through a device that turned her crystalline harmonics into human speech. "We know what your species risks by sheltering us," she said. "We know the stories told about our kind. Some are true. We do require the essence of conscious thought to survive, but we have never taken it by force from those who were not our enemies." President Williams asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Then how do you survive? How do you feed?" Resonance of Deep Waters was quiet for a long moment. "Our people are dying because we refuse to take what we need from innocence. We would rather perish than become the monsters others believe us to be. This is why we sought Earth. Your species alone seemed to value mercy over fear." As the first day of asylum ended, Chen found herself wondering if humanity had just made the biggest mistake in its history, or taken the first step toward something the galaxy had never seen before. Either way, there was no turning back now. The Vorthak were here, and the entire galaxy was watching to see what would happen next. The protests started within hours of the news breaking. In every major city on Earth, crowds gathered with signs reading "Not in our name" and "Human lives matter more." Dr. Jennifer Walsh watched the chaos from her office window at the Luna Research Station, where she had been assigned to study the Vorthak refugees. "It's understandable," she told her assistant, Marcus Rivera. "People are scared. The entire galaxy tells us these beings are monsters, and we just invited them to our doorstep." Marcus pulled up the latest news feeds on his tablet. "It's not just Earth. The colonies are demanding explanations too. Mars Colony Council is threatening to declare independence if the Vorthak are allowed anywhere near their territory. But the real pressure was coming from beyond human space. The Galactic Council had issued an official statement calling humanity's decision a threat to all civilized life. The Altarian Trade Federation hadn't just cut ties, they had blockaded 3 major shipping routes that human merchants relied on. Food prices were already rising on the outer colonies. Dr. Walsh had spent the last week trying to understand what they were dealing with. The Vorthak were unlike any species she had encountered. Their biology was part crystal, part organic tissue, creating beings that seemed to exist between the physical and energy states, and their need for conscious thought as sustenance was real. "Dr. Walsh," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Resonance of Deep Waters, the Vorthak leader, standing in the doorway. Even weakened by hunger, the alien was striking. Her crystalline skin caught the light from the lab equipment and scattered it in patterns that made the room seem alive. "Resonance, how are you feeling today?" Dr. Walsh had been working with a small group of Vorthak to understand their needs better. "We grow weaker," the alien replied through her translation device. "Our youngest are beginning to enter the final silence. We understand if your people decide we are too great a burden." Dr. Walsh felt something twist in her chest. Over the past week, she had watched Vorthak children, if that's what they could be called, fade away from hunger. Their parents held vigil over them, singing in harmonies that made the air itself seem to weep. "Resonance, I need to ask you something directly. Your people need conscious thought to survive. What exactly does that mean?" The Vorthak leader was quiet for a moment. We consume the electrical patterns that create memory and experience. For our enemies, we would drain everything, past, present, the very sense of self. But that is not our only way. What do you mean? Conscious beings create far more mental energy than they use. A willing mind can share small portions without harm, and in return, Resonance paused, her crystalline features shifting slightly. We can give as well as take. Memories, knowledge, experiences from across the stars. Dr. Walsh felt her heart racing. You're saying you can share memories? Like a direct transfer of experience? Yes, but your people would not trust us enough for such intimacy. Nor should they. We are what your galaxy says we are. Dangerous. That evening, Dr. Walsh made a decision that would change everything. She submitted a request to the Luna Station administrator to volunteer for a consciousness-sharing experiment with the Vorthak. The response came back within an hour. Absolutely not. But Dr. Walsh couldn't stop thinking about what Resonance had said. The next day, she approached Professor Chen, an elderly researcher who had been battling memory loss from early-stage dementia. Professor, she said, what if I told you there was a way to preserve your memories, even the ones you're losing? What if there was a way to make sure everything you've learned in your 90 years could continue to help others? Professor Chen looked at her with eyes that were still sharp despite his condition. I'd say that sounds too good to be true, but I'd also say I'm listening. Within a week, they had organized the first official consciousness-sharing session. Professor Chen sat across from a young Vorthak named Echo of Ancient Storms. The alien was barely an adult by their standards, weakened by hunger but still possessing an ethereal beauty. I am honored by your gift, Echo said to the professor. What you offer will help me live, and what I share will remain with you always. The process was unlike anything Dr. Walsh had expected to witness. Professor Chen simply placed his hand on Echo's crystalline forehead. For a moment, both beings seemed to glow with soft light. Then it was over. Professor Chen sat back with wonder in his eyes. I can remember things I thought I had lost forever. But more than that, I can remember Echo's experiences too. I've seen stars being born. I know what it feels like to communicate through harmonic resonance. Echo, meanwhile, had visibly strengthened. The gray dullness in her crystal skin had brightened, and she moved with renewed energy. The professor's memories of teaching, of discovery, of love for learning, they will help sustain me for months, Echo explained. And his gift is voluntary, given freely. This causes no harm. Word of the successful experiment spread quickly despite attempts to keep it quiet. More volunteers came forward, some driven by curiosity, others by compassion. Elderly humans nearing the end of their lives found meaning in sharing their experiences with beings who could preserve them forever. Scientists discovered they could gain insights that would have taken decades to develop on their own. But the galaxy's reaction was explosive. The Centauri Coalition announced they were assembling a task force to monitor the human situation. The Rigel systems accused Earth of becoming a breeding ground for abominations. Trade agreements were torn up. Human diplomats found themselves unwelcome in dozens of star systems. President Williams addressed the Earth Global Assembly with grim news. We are facing complete economic isolation. Food shortages are beginning on the outer colonies. Some of our own member worlds are considering withdrawing from the United Earth Alliance, but there was also unexpected support. Dr. Walsh received messages from scientists across human space who wanted to participate in the consciousness-sharing program. A group of terminally ill patients from Mars Colony volunteered to travel to Luna Station. Even some military personnel, intrigued by the tactical advantages of shared experiences, requested permission to work with the Vorthak. The breakthrough came when a Vorthak named Deep Current Flowing shared combat memories with a human Marine. The Marine suddenly possessed centuries of tactical knowledge from across the galaxy. In return, the Vorthak gained human insights into improvisation and adaptability. We're not just helping them survive, Dr. Walsh reported to Earth Command. We're creating something new, a form of symbiosis that benefits both species. Admiral Rodriguez reviewed her data with growing amazement. Are you telling me that these aliens can share military knowledge directly with our forces? It's more than that, sir. They can share technological knowledge, scientific discoveries, cultural insights, anything stored in conscious memory. And they can do it without harming the donor. But as the program expanded, so did the opposition. Terrorist attacks targeted Luna Station. Protest ships tried to blockade the Vorthak refugee fleet. The governor of Titan Colony declared martial law to prevent alien contamination. The crisis reached its peak when the Galactic Council issued an ultimatum. Humanity has 30 standard days to surrender the Vorthak for proper disposal, or face the consequences of harboring enemies of all civilized life. Dr. Walsh stood in the observation deck of Luna Station, watching Vorthak children play with human children in the station's garden dome. The alien children sang in harmonies that made the flowers bloom brighter, while human children laughed and tried to mimic the sounds. "Resonance," she said to the Vorthak leader who had joined her. "Are we making a mistake? Are we putting our entire species at risk for yours?" The alien was quiet for a long moment, her crystalline features reflecting the light from the growing plants below. "Dr. Walsh, for the first time in our existence, we are not taking life to sustain ourselves. We are sharing in it. Your species has shown us a way to survive without becoming the monsters we were forced to be. If that is a mistake, it is a beautiful one." As the Council's deadline approached, humanity faced a choice that would define their place in the galaxy forever. They could surrender the Vorthak and return to their isolated corner of space, or they could stand by their principles and face whatever consequences came next. The decision, when it came, surprised no one who truly knew humanity. They would not abandon those who had nowhere else to go. The second group of refugees arrived 6 months after the Vorthak. This time there was no debate about whether to help them. The decision had already been made. Humanity would not turn away those with nowhere else to go. Captain Maria Santos was patrolling the edge of human space when her sensors picked up the distress signal. The ships that limped toward her were sleek and organic looking, but they moved wrong. Instead of the coordinated patterns typical of hive mind species, each vessel flew independently, some even bumping into others. "This is Captain Santos of the UES Guardian," she broadcast. "We're receiving your distress signal. Please identify yourselves." The response came as a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, all saying different things. It took her communications officer several minutes to sort through the chaos. "Captain, they're Nethys," the officer reported. "But something's wrong. Nethys operate as a collective consciousness, but these ones, they're all individuals." Captain Santos felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard rumors of a plague that had swept through Nethys space 2 years ago. The report said it had destroyed their collective consciousness, leaving the survivors as isolated individuals. To other species, this meant the Nethys were no longer truly Nethys. They were broken, contaminated, dangerous. "Please," came one voice, clearer than the others. "We seek the humans who helped the Crystal Singers. We have heard you accept the unwanted." Santos made the decision quickly. "You have permission to enter human space. Follow my ship to New Geneva Station." The Nethys refugees were perhaps even more pitiful than the Vorthak had been. Once they had been part of a vast collective consciousness spanning thousands of worlds. Now they were individuals, and the isolation was driving them mad. Many couldn't stop talking, desperate for any kind of mental connection. Others had retreated into complete silence, overwhelmed by the experience of being alone in their own minds. Dr. Walsh, who had become humanity's unofficial expert on refugee species, was called in to help. She found herself working with beings who had never learned to function as individuals. They didn't understand concepts like personal property, privacy, or independent decision-making. "It's like they're children," she explained to the station administrator, "but children with the accumulated knowledge and experience of a civilization that's existed for millions of years." The breakthrough came when a Vorthak named Whisper and Starlight volunteered to work with the Nethys. Through consciousness sharing, Whisper could temporarily connect isolated Nethys minds, giving them brief relief from their solitude. In return, the Nethys shared their vast technological knowledge and understanding of collective problem-solving. But before humanity could fully integrate the Nethys refugees, the third group arrived. The Sholtar came not as refugees fleeing disaster, but as criminals begging for sanctuary. Their ships were unmarked, and they approached human space under cover of stealth technology that was among the best in the galaxy. Admiral Rodriguez personally handled their first contact. The Sholtar leader, who called himself Blood on Snow, was direct in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. "We are murderers," he said without preamble. "Our biology requires us to commit violence to survive. Every few cycles we must kill or we die. The galaxy has declared us monsters and hunts us wherever we go. We ask for sanctuary not because we are innocent, but because we have nowhere else to turn. The revelation sent shockwaves through human space. The Vorthak fed on consciousness but could do so without harm. The Nethys were broken but harmless. The Sholtar were admitting to being killers by nature. President Williams convened an emergency session of the Earth Global Assembly. The debate raged for days. How could humanity shelter beings that required murder to survive? What would that say about human values? Dr. Walsh found herself arguing for the Sholtar's acceptance despite her own reservations. "We don't know the full story," she insisted. "We didn't know the full story about the Vorthak either. And look how that turned out." The decision came down to a single question. Could the Sholtar's violent needs be satisfied without harming innocents? Blood on Snow provided the answer during a private meeting with human leadership. "We do not need to kill innocents," he explained. "Any death will suffice. We have survived by hunting the galaxy's predators, by eliminating pirates and raiders, but we have been branded as murderers regardless of who we kill." "You're saying you only kill criminals?" Admiral Rodriguez asked. "We prefer to, but when we are hunted ourselves, when we are driven to desperate corners, sometimes we have no choice but to take what we can find. This is why we come to you. Give us purpose, give us targets that deserve death, and we will trouble no innocents." The solution that emerged was controversial but effective. The Sholtar were integrated into human security forces, but with strict conditions. They could only act against confirmed threats: pirates, slavers, war criminals. Every action was monitored and recorded, and they were paired with human partners who could help them maintain their moral compass. The arrangement worked better than anyone expected. The Sholtar possessed reflexes and combat instincts that had evolved over millions of years. They could track enemies through space in ways that human technology couldn't match. But more importantly, they were grateful for the chance to use their violent nature for a constructive purpose. Captain Elena Vasquez was among the first humans to work directly with a Sholtar partner. The alien, who went by Sharp Edge Cutting, was unlike anything she had expected. Despite his predatory nature, he was thoughtful, even gentle when not in combat. "Your species puzzles us," Sharp Edge Cutting told her during a patrol mission. "We expected to find the same fear and disgust we have encountered everywhere else. Instead, you seek to understand us. Understanding is the first step to cooperation," Vasquez replied, "and cooperation makes everyone stronger." The truth of that statement became apparent when the three refugee species began working together. Vorthak consciousness sharing allowed instant communication between team members. Nethys analytical abilities could process vast amounts of tactical data simultaneously. Sholtar combat skills provided unmatched effectiveness in dangerous situations. But it was humanity that provided the essential element: the ability to see potential where others saw only problems. Dr. Walsh stood in the observation lounge of New Geneva Station, watching an extraordinary sight. In the station's main plaza, Vorthak children sang harmonies that helped isolated Nethys minds connect temporarily with each other. Human teenagers taught both alien species how to play sports that required individual decision-making. Sholtar adults, their violent urges satisfied by recent anti-piracy operations, shared hunting stories that fascinated human children. "It's not perfect," she said to Resonance of Deep Waters, who had become something like a friend over the months. "There are still problems, still conflicts. Some humans are afraid. Some of your people struggle with integration. Perfection is not required," the Vorthak replied. "Acceptance is enough. Your species has given us something we had not dared hope for, a chance to be more than our worst impulses." The news from the greater galaxy was not encouraging. The Galactic Council had branded humanity as a rogue species and prohibited member civilizations from any contact with human space. Economic sanctions had forced humanity to become more self-sufficient than ever before. Some human colonies had even been attacked by unknown raiders that everyone knew were council-sponsored. But there were also encouraging signs. A few independent species had quietly reached out to human representatives, expressing interest in the refugee integration program. Scientists from non-council worlds were requesting information about consciousness-sharing techniques. Most surprisingly, there were reports of other species following humanity's example, accepting refugees that the Council had declared unwanted. The biggest surprise came when a fourth group of refugees appeared at the edge of human space. These weren't fleeing persecution or biological needs, they were volunteers. A mixed group of beings from a dozen different species, all of whom had been declared defective by their home governments for various reasons. Among them were Signan artists whose work was considered too emotional for their logical society, Betelgeuse miners who had refused to accept slavery as their natural condition, and even a few members of council species who had committed the crime of expressing sympathy for the undesirable races. We have heard that humans accept those who do not fit, their spokesperson explained. We wish to see if this is true. President Williams welcomed them personally. Human space is open to anyone willing to live in peace with others, she announced. We judge people by their actions, not their origins. As the year ended, humanity had gone from being a minor species on the galaxy's edge to becoming the center of an unprecedented experiment in interspecies cooperation. They had taken in the galaxy's outcasts and rejects, and somehow created something stronger than any of them could have been alone. But the galaxy's established powers were not going to tolerate this challenge to their authority much longer. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and humanity would soon face the greatest test of their principles they had ever encountered. The question was no longer whether they could help the galaxy's unwanted. The question was whether they could survive that the war began at dawn on Earth, when the Galactic Council's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Admiral Rodriguez watched from Earth Defense Command as his sensors showed impossible numbers. Over 10,000 warships from a dozen different species, all united in their determination to end what they called the human contamination. Admiral, his communications officer called out, "We're receiving a transmission from the Council fleet." The image that appeared on the main screen was High Counselor Vextar of the Altarian Federation. His crystalline features set in what humans had learned to recognize as grim determination. "Humans of Earth," Vextar announced, "you have been given repeated opportunities to correct your grievous error. Instead, you have continued to harbor the enemies of all civilized life. This ends now. Surrender the abominations you protect. Submit to Council oversight, and your species will be allowed to continue existing in a supervised capacity." Admiral Rodriguez stepped forward. "High Counselor, the beings we protect are refugees seeking shelter. They have committed no crimes against humanity." "They exist," Vextar replied coldly. "That is crime enough. You have 24 hours to comply, or we will cleanse your systems by force." As the transmission ended, Rodriguez turned to his staff. The faces around him showed the same grim determination he felt. They had known this day would come. "Send word to all human fleets," he ordered. "Implement Defense Protocol 7, and get me a connection to our allies." The allies were what the Galactic Council called abominations, but what humanity had learned to call family. Over the past 2 years, the refugees had integrated into human society in ways that surprised everyone. More importantly, they had become part of humanity's defense network. In the Vorthak section of Luna Station, Resonance of Deep Waters gathered her people around her. Through their consciousness-sharing network, every Vorthak in human space was instantly aware of the threat. "The time has come to repay the debt we owe," she announced. "Humanity sheltered us when we had nothing. Now we must help them survive what our presence has brought upon them." The Vorthak response was immediate and unprecedented. For the first time in their species' history, they linked their consciousness not just with each other but with willing human commanders. Admiral Rodriguez suddenly found himself with access to tactical knowledge spanning thousands of years and dozens of galactic conflicts. Captain Elena Vasquez, now commanding the human fleet's most advanced ship, felt her Sholtar partner Sharp Edge Cutting tense beside her as they watched the Council fleet approach. "How many ships do they have compared to us?" she asked. "They outnumber us 30 to 1, Sharp Edge Cutting replied, his predatory senses already calculating attack patterns. "In any normal engagement, we would be annihilated within hours." "Good thing this won't be a normal engagement." The Nethys refugees had spent months working with human engineers to integrate their collective problem-solving abilities with human technology. What they had created was unlike anything the galaxy had seen, a distributed command system that could process thousands of tactical variables simultaneously while maintaining the flexibility of individual decision-making. Commander Zhang Wei sat in what they called the Integration Center, surrounded by Nethys minds that had volunteered to link with human tactical systems. Through this network, every human ship could respond to threats with the analytical power of a collective intelligence, while maintaining the unpredictability that came from human intuition. Integration center to all ships, Zhang announced. Battle networks are online. Remember, we're not trying to win through superior firepower. We're going to win because we're something they've never faced before. The first engagement came at the edge of the outer colonies. A Council advance force of 500 ships moved to secure the mining stations around Kepler 442. They expected to face a handful of human patrol vessels. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to read their minds. Captain Sarah Chen, now commanding a mixed squadron of human and refugee ships, watched as her tactical display lit up with information. Through her Vorthak-enhanced awareness, she could anticipate enemy movements before they happened. Her Nethys-supported computers processed countermeasures faster than any single mind could comprehend, and her Sholtar crew members moved through combat maneuvers with deadly precision. "Target their command ship," she ordered. Sharp Edge's people have identified the fleet coordinator. The Sholtar had studied galactic military doctrine for months, learning the weaknesses in every major species command structure. They knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum disruption. The Council ships found themselves fighting an enemy that was always one step ahead. Human vessels appeared where they weren't expected and vanished before retaliation could arrive. Their weapons seemed to target the most vulnerable systems with uncanny accuracy. Most disturbing of all, their tactics made no sense according to established military doctrine. But they worked. Within 6 hours, the Council advance force was in full retreat. High Counselor Vexitar stared at the tactical reports in disbelief. "How is this possible? They are a minor species with outdated technology." "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "their ships are moving in coordinated patterns we've never seen before. It's as if they can predict our movements, and their targeting accuracy suggests they know our ship designs better than we do." Vextar's crystalline features darkened. "They're using the Abomination's abilities. The Vorthak mind stealers are sharing stolen knowledge, and the broken Nethys are processing information for them." "What are your orders, sir?" "Bring forward the main fleet. All 10,000 ships. We end this quickly, before their corruption can spread further." But the main fleet's advance ran into something the Council had never encountered. An enemy that learned from every engagement. The refugee species shared their knowledge freely, creating a military force that adapted faster than any traditional army could match. The Vorthak shared memories of every military engagement their people had ever witnessed. Human commanders suddenly possessed intimate knowledge of Council tactics, ship designs, and command protocols. They knew how each species preferred to fight, what their weaknesses were, and how to exploit them. The Nethys provided analytical capabilities that could process vast amounts of sensor data in real time. Human ships no longer had to guess where enemies might be. They could track and predict movements across entire star systems. Simultaneously, the Sholtar brought combat instincts. Honed over millions of years of evolution, they could sense weakness in enemy formations, identify the perfect moment to strike, and execute attacks with precision that bordered on supernatural. But it was humanity that provided the crucial element, the ability to think outside established patterns. Council forces were trained to fight according to strict doctrines that had worked for millennia. Humans threw those doctrines away and created new ones on the fly. The Battle of Ross 128 became the turning point. Council forces had surrounded the human colony, expecting an easy victory. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that used the planet's asteroid belt as a weapons platform, turned abandoned mining equipment into guided missiles, and somehow coordinated defensive fire from across multiple solar systems. Captain Vasquez led the counterattack with a mixed fleet that included ships from all the refugee species. Her tactical display showed a three-dimensional battlefield that spanned light years, with thousands of contacts moving in patterns that would have been impossible for any single species to coordinate. "All ships, this is Vasquez," she announced. "Remember what we're fighting for. Not just our homes, but the right to decide who deserves sanctuary. Show them what happens when the galaxy's rejects work together." The battle raged for 3 days. Council ships that had conquered dozens of worlds found themselves outmaneuvered by converted cargo vessels, crewed by defective beings. Their advanced weapons were countered by tactics that seemed to come from nowhere. Their superior numbers meant nothing when they couldn't predict where their enemies would strike next. On the third day, something unprecedented happened. A group of council ships, mostly from species that had been conquered rather than founding members, sent a message to the human fleet. "This is Captain Morden of the Cygnon Third Fleet," the transmission read. "We request permission to defect to your forces. We have seen what you offer to those who have nowhere else to go, and we wish to be part of it." Within hours, more defections followed. Entire squadrons of lesser species abandoned their council allegiances and asked to join humanity's alliance. They had seen how humans treated their allies, had witnessed the unprecedented cooperation between former enemies, and they wanted to be part of something better than the rigid hierarchy that had oppressed them for centuries. High Counselor Vexitar watched his mighty fleet begin to crumble from within. The humans and their abominations weren't just winning through superior tactics, they were offering his own subordinate species something the Council never had. "True equality and acceptance, sir," his tactical officer reported. "We're losing ships faster than we can replace them. The defections are spreading. Some of our member species are questioning whether this war is justified. The consequences of The intelligence came from an unlikely source, a Altarian engineer who had been working on High Counselor Vextar's secret weapon. Through the consciousness-sharing network that now connected human space, the engineer's desperate message reached Admiral Rodriguez within hours of transmission. "They call it the Purifier," the engineer's report read, "a stellar destabilization device capable of turning any star into a supernova. Vextar plans to use it on Sol to make an example of humanity. The device will be ready within days." Dr. Walsh read the technical specifications with growing horror. The weapon didn't just threaten Earth. It would wipe out all life in the solar system, including the millions of refugees who had found shelter in human space. "Can we stop it?" President Williams asked during the Emergency Council meeting. Admiral Rodriguez shook his head. "The device is located deep in Council space, defended by their remaining fleet. We'd need to fight through thousands of ships to reach it." "Then we fight through thousands of ships," came a voice from the back of the room. Resonance of Deep Waters stepped forward, her crystalline features reflecting the light in patterns that spoke of grim determination. "Humanity risked everything to save us. Now we risk everything to save humanity." What followed was the largest mobilization in galactic history. Not just human ships, but vessels from every species that had found sanctuary in human space. Vorthak bioships that had been dying when they arrived now glowed with renewed life. Nathis vessels that moved with the coordinated precision of their collective intelligence. Sholtar raiders that had become the most feared anti-piracy force in known space. But the greatest surprise came from the defectors, the lesser species that had abandoned the Council during the war. They arrived in massive numbers, bringing with them detailed intelligence about Council defenses and the location of the Purifier. Captain Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the assembled fleet through her viewscreen. Nearly 20,000 ships from dozens of species, all united behind a single principle, that mercy was stronger than fear. "Elena," Sharp Edge Cutting said beside her, "this is the largest military force ever assembled. But we are not going to conquer. We are going to liberate." The journey to the Council's core worlds took 2 weeks. Along the way, more ships joined their fleet. Entire colonies that had been oppressed by Council rule declared their independence and pledged support to humanity's cause. The rigid order that had controlled the galaxy for millennia was cracking under the pressure of an idea: that all beings deserved a chance at dignity. The final battle took place in the Altair system, where the Purifier hung in space like a mechanical moon. High Counselor Vexitar had gathered every remaining loyal ship to defend it. 8,000 vessels representing the last bastion of the old galactic order. But numbers were no longer the deciding factor. The human alliance fought with a coordination that defied belief. Vorthak consciousness sharing allowed instant communication across the entire fleet. Nethys analytical abilities predicted enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. Sholtar combat instincts identified weaknesses in formations that had been considered impenetrable. Captain Chen, now commanding a squadron of mixed-species ships, felt the battle unfold around her like a complex dance. Her crew included humans, Vorthak, Nethys, Sholtar, and a dozen other species. all working together with a harmony that would have been impossible under the old system. "Target the Purifier's power core," she ordered. "We end this threat permanently." But as the battle raged, something unexpected happened. Ships from the Council fleet began breaking formation, not to retreat but to join the human alliance. The crews of these vessels had seen the reports from the front lines, had witnessed how the humans treated former enemies, and they wanted to be part of something better. High Counselor Vexitar watched in disbelief as his own forces abandoned him. The Signan fleet admiral who had served the Council for decades sent a personal message. "I have spent my life enforcing a system that calls mercy weakness. I choose to be weak." Within hours, Vexitar found himself commanding fewer than 1,000 ships against 25,000. The mathematics of the situation were clear, but he refused to surrender. "Activate the Purifier," he ordered. "If we cannot preserve order, then let chaos be contained." The massive weapon began charging its stellar destabilization beam, targeting not just Sol but every star system where humans had established colonies. It would take days for the beam to build enough power, but when it fired, it would eliminate human civilization entirely. Admiral Rodriguez coordinated the final assault from the bridge of the UES Harmony. Through his Vorthak-enhanced consciousness, he could feel the determination of every ship captain in his fleet. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the right to show compassion in an uncaring universe. "All ships," he announced. "This is our moment. Not just to win a war, but to prove that different species can work together as equals. Show them what the galaxy looks like when everyone has a place." The assault on the Purifier was unlike anything in military history. Ships dove through defensive fire with Sholtar-enhanced reflexes. Weapons targeted critical systems with Nethys-calculated precision. Pilots flew maneuvers that came from shared memories spanning thousands of years of combat experience. But it was a group of human engineers, working alongside Vorthak technicians and Nethys analysts, who found the weapon's fatal flaw. The Purifier's targeting system relied on a central computer that could be overloaded by feeding it contradictory information. Dr. Walsh, who had insisted on joining the assault fleet, led the team that infiltrated the weapon. Moving through its corridors with Sholtar-trained reflexes and Vorthak-shared knowledge of Altarian technology, they reached the central control room just as the weapon was preparing to fire. "Uploading virus now," she reported. "The targeting system is confused. It can't lock onto any star system." High Counselor Vextar's voice crackled over the communication system. "You may have stopped this weapon, but you cannot stop what you have started. Order will collapse. Chaos will consume the galaxy." President Williams herself responded from Earth. "You're right, Counselor. The old order is ending. But what comes next won't be chaos, it will be freedom." The Purifier's power core went critical as its own systems turned against it. The massive weapon tore itself apart in an explosion that lit up the Altair system like a second sun. With it died the last hope of preserving the rigid hierarchy that had ruled the galaxy for so long. In the aftermath of the battle, humanity faced its greatest test yet. They had defeated the most powerful military force in galactic history. They could now dictate terms to the remaining Council worlds, demand tribute, establish themselves as the new galactic overlords. Instead, they offered amnesty. "To all former Council forces," President Williams announced in a galaxy-wide broadcast, "you are invited to join our alliance as equals. We judge no one by their past actions, only by their willingness to work toward a better future." The response was overwhelming. Worlds that had been part of the Council for millennia declared their independence and requested membership in humanity's alliance. The Altarian Trade Federation, leaderless after Vextar's death, voted to dissolve itself and reform as an equal partner with other species. Within a year, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The rigid caste system that had divided species into civilized and barbaric categories was replaced by a loose confederation of equals. The outcasts and rejects that humanity had sheltered became the core of a new interstellar civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. Dr. Walsh stood in the observatory of New Geneva Station, now the de facto capital of what people were calling the Galactic Alliance. Through the transparent walls, she could see ships from hundreds of species coming and going, all of them free to travel wherever they wished, to trade with whoever they chose, to make lives for themselves based on their own merits rather than their species' reputation. "It's not perfect," she said to Resonance of Deep Waters, who had become something like an old friend over the years. There are still conflicts, still prejudices to overcome. Perfection was never the goal, the Vorthak replied. Acceptance was enough. Your species taught us that being different doesn't mean being wrong. A young human child ran past them, chasing a Nethys adolescent while a Sholtar adult watched protectively. None of them seemed to think there was anything unusual about their friendship. Do you think it will last? Dr. Walsh asked. Resonance of Deep Waters was quiet for a moment, her crystalline features catching the light from the stars. Your species has a saying, the arc of the universe bends toward justice. I think it bends toward mercy as well. And mercy, once shown, has a way of spreading. Across the galaxy, former enemies worked side by side. Scientists shared knowledge freely between species. Trade flowed along routes that had been closed for centuries. Children grew up thinking that cooperation between different species was normal, natural, the way things had always been. The transformation wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be. There were still holdout worlds that refused to join the alliance, still species that maintained their old prejudices. But for the first time in galactic history, they were the exception rather than the rule.